finish this semester up, we're going to take another look at Tool 36 using the broken line, and we're going to wrap up class by looking at Tool 33, and that's the tool of strategically placed repetition. And that tool of repetition brings in foreshadowing, brings in attention to specific details, all of the elements of these other tools, the 2-3-1 rule. Repetition involves all of these things, a repetition of strategic phrases, words, key terms, a repetition of strategic details. It can even be a color, a particular color that keeps popping up, repetition of strategic points, repetition of observations, even repetition of specific kinds of grammatical structures. So let's begin this final view for advanced expository writing of Tool 36 and Tool 33. So Tool 36, remember, is the broken line. And we use this broken line. It means we're going from storytelling to giving information from things we've researched. We've researched history, we've researched location, we've researched research, okay? Who's done research on this area and what have they found out? And we've analyzed that research, and analyze means how does it apply to this particular story that we're telling? And we're using all of these elements together, but particularly we're using this broken line and weaving in the results of our research, of this head knowledge we've gained, this statistical data, these hard facts from research, experts' opinion, and we're weaving that into story because first and foremost and finally and in conclusion, story is what motivates readers to care about our topic. So the broken line, I love this illustration of the broken line, right? It leads us somewhere. The broken line, weaving these things together has to reveal the big picture. So the broken line is always happening within the context of the bigger picture, and is, if you will, even a result of the existence of a bigger picture. So we're going to use a last excerpts from a final essay to illustrate both these tools of using the broken line and of the power of repetition here in one essay. And this essay, the title of the essay is Cystic Fibrosis. So for those of you who've never heard that term, cystic fibrosis, it's a disease. And of course, if you're going to write about a disease, something like cystic fibrosis, that driving question immediately that pops into my mind, pops into the average person's mind is, I've got all this stuff going on in my life. Why should I care about cystic fibrosis? Why should I take any of my too short time to read and find out more about cystic fibrosis? So that's the first question that must be answered when we begin writing. And notice how this particular author begins his essay. So he begins it with information. Now, I've been telling you guys, begin with story, begin with story, begin with story. Well, the context of this essay is a larger book, and the name of the book just happens to be Alex, the Story of a Life. So anyone that opens this book or begins reading this essay already knows there's a story here. So how does he begin? He begins with a definition. So the whole first two paragraphs are just information. He begins with a definition. Look at the different ways he gives an explanation. So it's a disease primarily of the lungs, has nothing to do with discs. It has everything to do with the body just going wild, producing mucus, and whatever mechanisms are in the place of a normal person that moderates and modulates the production of mucus. In cystic fibrosis, that bodily component is gone, and the body is just pumping out as much mucus as it can. And so he goes on with the explanation, and then he also does some description here. So there are people who have cystic fibrosis, and they don't even know it, okay, because the production is just affecting certain mucus glands in certain parts of the body. And then he describes those who are the most severe patients, where it's like every part of the body that produces mucus is producing it uncontrollably. Now, in these two paragraphs, let's look at where this author is using Tool 33, the tool of repetition, even in these information paragraphs. So look at the end of paragraph 1. Now remember that 2-3-1 rule? So this author is also leveraging that 2-3-1 rule for all it's worth and putting the most important thing at the end of that first paragraph. So what does all of this excessive production of mucus means? It means that everything in the body is undermined. Breathing, eating, reproduction, the ability for, the defining characteristic of life is its ability to multiply and produce more life. And here, even cystic fibrosis shuts that down. In other words, it undermines breathing, eating, reproduction, all of life itself. Now look at the end of that second paragraph as well. Well, these are information paragraphs, but notice how this author very purposefully, this author knows where he's going. So even at the ends of these informational paragraphs, he's preparing his audience for what's coming next, because in the end, this is what this information, all of this head knowledge, all of these facts, all of these descriptive details, everything that is known intellectually, cognitively about cystic fibrosis, this is what it comes down to. And notice again that repetition. He's using that 2-3-1, so he's leveraging that one place at the end of the second paragraph, and he's repeating the same thing. He's repeating the same thing he had at the end of the first paragraph. So there are some CF patients who never know they have the disease, but what happens? They die. They die young of some misunderstood pulmonary involvement. The cause of death isn't clear. At the other end of the spectrum, some infants are essentially born dead. Their tiny bodies so ravaged by the disease that they cannot even begin to draw breath. Do you see that repetition? Breathing at the end of paragraph 1, breath at the end of paragraph 2, in that one position at the end of both paragraphs serving, functioning primarily that informational purpose in the development of the essay. But here this author is very clear. What this means at the end is death, and a young death. The cystic fibrosis people die young. So then we move straight now into the third paragraph, and here's the shift. All right, he's broken that information line. He's broken it, and he's gone from giving you information to he's introducing someone's story. So as events proved, Alex was toward the worst end of the spectrum. So Alex's story begins here. When she died at 8, half the children now born in the States with cystic fibrosis who are diagnosed and treated live until 18. So she died at 8, but the children who were born with CF at the time of her death, have a much longer life expectancy, at least at the time of his writing of this essay. So notice, though, however, he's also diverging within this paragraph where he's begun the story, but he's giving us some historical context here, too. So talking about when the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation was started, you know, the longest anybody could be expected to live with the weakest case was to kindergarten. So he's giving us some historical context, but look at what's at the heart of this historical context. He's giving the historical context to show us when Alex lived and what was happening right before she lived, what happened when she died, what was going to happen after her death. So again, look what he's done here. Second sentence, while she died at 8. So he's keeping this. See this repetition here? This is his whole purpose. Remember, this opening question is, why should I care about cystic fibrosis? And he's jumping in here right away, and he's talking about life and death. Cystic fibrosis is a life and death issue. There's no halfway point here, okay? Either we're gonna find ways for them to live, or they're all gonna die. And so here he introduced, she died at 8. And then look at again in that critical, notice that boom, boom, boom. End of first paragraph, end of second paragraph, end of third paragraph. It isn't accurate to say that we kept Alex alive. We merely postponed her dying. So again, he's ending, he's using that same structure. See that repetition? This tool 33, this idea of repetition, this tool can be exercised with any element of our writing, any literary device, even grammatical structures, and certainly key words. And notice, I want you to notice what just happened here. Do you notice how we also applied that paragraphing tool that we talked about at last class? We merely postponed her dying. That one sentence, it ended the paragraph. Now the paragraph ends, keeping that emphasis. It isn't accurate to say that we kept Alex alive. Ooh. Now we've summed up the last statement of these first 3 paragraphs, 2 informational, 1 beginning somebody's story. With this 1 paragraph, we merely postponed her dying. The we means the writer is intimately connected with this young girl, Alex, whom we already know is going to die from cystic fibrosis. So here, Alex's day would start with an inhalation treatment. So we've taken 1 day out of the life. Notice it's not like starting as she was born here and there. He's condensed this, and he's taking a representative day to give his reader an experience, to walk them through what it was like to be Alex as a child with CF. And how, and he describes this day. So this is information as well, but it's information within the context of the story, what her day is like. And we see the story element he brings in. This isn't a quote. This is something she said within the context of, now we know it's her daddy writing the story, her father. So right now we know this story is intensely personal. It's not just Alex's story. It's the story of Alex's father. Now we've shifted from the position of the child with CF to who's going to die young, to the perspective of her parents, who have a much broader understanding of what it would mean for her not to die young, to live to adulthood, to marry, to have children of her own. As something that Alex as a child who dying at 8 couldn't appreciate, that fullness of life. And look, one of her first full sentences was, no not the down ones now, Daddy. It's dialogue. And let's move on then. We've shifted now. So after that powerful paragraph, 2 paragraphs that develop Alex's story, notice how now the author, his name's Frank Deford, and the author, Alex's father, actually was a very famous sports writer. I may have talked about him earlier this semester, but I want to use this story again to wrap our semester up because of just this masterful use of the broken line, which I really want you guys to incorporate in your researched essay, your longer essay, because the purpose of that researched essay is to inform, it is to explain, it is to analyze, it is to give you reader head knowledge, but it is to make that head knowledge also living and important, to motivate your reader in some way from understanding how that head knowledge affects human lives. So he goes back, and notice he's broken the line of Alex's story and his story, and he's giving us now this much larger context of psychological research. He's zooming out. Psychologists have found that almost any child with a chronic disease assumes that the illness is a punishment. Okay, and he explains this. So he's giving us this large lens of not just CF, children with CF, but how sickness and disease affects children in general. And then he goes back to Alex's story and gives us these very specific moments, details. Notice he names her best friends. Guys, you've got to do that. Some of you have got this, you're getting this, and it's changing your writing over this semester. And others of you just are not going to this level of detail yet, where you're naming names, you're focusing on a specific incident, and you're bringing it to life. Look how she's doing it, how he's doing it. When she played the doctor, right? It was always cancer she was seeking to cure. She adored her specialist. We have his name, Tom Dolan. Tool, get the name of the dog, right? Do you see how all of these tools, he's pulling these tools out of his writing toolbox and breathing life into his writing. And then in cystic fibrosis, a child must transfer this attitude toward the parents as well. Oh my gosh. So now he's not just dealing with this larger knowledge that his daughter doesn't even have of what CF means for her in the big picture, but he has to deal with the fact that he's her punisher. So we end there with that story element. In some moments, I must have thought that I was also being punished. So the story is the story of his daughter, but it's his story. So now he's going to shift again. I'm excerpting this, so there's some more anecdotes, specific examples he uses, and how the fight to keep children alive, it's not just the physical therapy, but there's a medicinal treatment as well. It's always treating the symptoms. The disease is incurable. So always remember that. What advances have been made is to postpone death, not cure the disease. And look at what he says here now. He's moved back from that information, so this is what psychologists tell you, and this is what it looks like. So head knowledge is not what this is about. I'm not writing this to give you facts about this disease, Explain. You can explain to me intellectually about how what we were doing to her helped her, preserved her life, kept her alive longer. When every day I had to thump my little girl. We're talking about a baby here. We're talking about a 2-year-old, we're talking about 8 years of this man doing this to his child. Pound away on her body. Sometimes when she was pleading with me, crying out in pain to stop, something came over me, changed me. I guess over 8 years, I did therapy 2,000 times, and Carol, his wife, many more, probably 3,000, having to manage both times each day when I was traveling. I never understood how she managed, but still, me, back to my story here, 2,000 times I had to beat my already sick little girl, make her hurt, make her cry, and make her plead, no, not the down ones, Daddy. And in the end, for what? And we've come full circle back, and notice again, every paragraph is coming back to the finality of it all, this struggle between life and death. How long are we going to keep the breath in her? In the end, for what? So head knowledge is what, and we want to give people head knowledge. Head knowledge creates context. It's the structure. And we need that head knowledge. We need that structure. But story brings heart knowledge to it, experiential knowledge. What we know now, what this means for other human beings. So here's how he wraps up his essay then, and he comes straight back to a specific time and a specific place, a day, an hour, a particular conversation. And he tracks as Alex grows up how she notices other children don't go through these daily beatings, okay? And he ends, only slowly did the recognition come that she was singled out for these things. And then she began to grope for the implications. One spring day when she was 4, notice that word spring. What do we associate with spring? Life. Do you see that tool of repetition being used here in minute choices of words, of details? This man knows why he's writing. He knows where he wants to take his reader, what question he wants his reader to ask. He knows his reader, the question his reader starts out with is, why should I care about cystic fibrosis? What does it have to do with me? And he wants them to start asking a different question. One spring day when she was 4, a 4-year-old, guys, Alex came into my office and said she had a question. Notice now, this is dialogue, and dialogue is action. Some of you are using dialogue so effectively, and some of you just keep circling around this, getting down to a specific day and time and place, and narrating the events and the conversations that occurred at that day and time and place. And at the end of this class, I'm here to tell you that there is no single most effective way to improve your writing, academic writing, research papers that are ahead of you yet to do, than to master this skill of bringing things down to a particular time, day, and place, and giving specific names and details, and including dialogue, and avoiding just peppering your research with quotations. Just one was all she would bother me with. Notice that, all she would bother me with. All right, I asked, what was it? And Alex said, I won't have to do therapy when I'm a lady, will I? It was a leading question. She knew exactly where she was taking me. And Frank DeFord knows exactly where he's taking his reader. As directly as I could, I said, no, Alex. Not because I would lie outright about it, but because I knew the score by then. I knew she would not grow up to be a lady unless a cure was found. She would not grow up. Again, notice that repetition being used here, and in that all-important one place, and this is the end of the essay. So this is that 2-3-1 at the end of the essay, unless a cure was found. Where Frank Deford wants to take us is from why should I care, what does it mean, to how can I help? How can I help save lives? I can help save a life. I can help them find a cure. Very, very effective use of the broken line. So, why should I care about cystic fibrosis? And this is why, according to Frank Deford, summarized in this one grave, Alexandra M. Deford, 1971 to 1980. What an effective use of the broken line. What a masterful application of the technique, the tool of repetition. So as I send you out to finish your final draft of your last assignment for our class this semester, your researched essay, I want to send you out with this in mind. Take this assignment as an opportunity to master this skill of including information and explanation and analysis with story, and using somebody's story or several somebody's stories to make your point living in the hearts of your readers and not just their minds.